Welcome to the Nonprofit Exchange Podcast. Stories by leaders for leaders to help you raise the bar on your own excellence, to release the potential inside of you. Now, here's today's podcast.
Hey, it's Hugh Ballou. This episode of the Nonprofit Exchange is great, like every one of them, but this one's a new friend who's right here in Lynchburg, Virginia, and he's got an extensive history of founding charities and taking them not just to the next level, taking them to the top, and I guess in some cases over the top.
Over the top. That'd be a good way to put it.
Yeah. So Ray Buchanan, we're going to talk principally about a charity you formed, which you originally called Stop Hunger Now, and now it's Rise Against Hunger.
Right.
And so I want to let you tell a little bit about yourself and then talk about, you had an idea about something. How did you put it together and start this, get people on board and get it funded? There's a lot of people with ideas and they don't really understand the sequence and how to put it together. So tell us about Ray, and thank you for being on the Nonprofit Exchange today.
Good to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. I was in the Marine Corps during Vietnam, came out of the Marine Corps, did all my undergraduate work in about 2.5 years. And then I had a mentor who saw more in me than I thought was there, but he said, where are you going to go to get your divinity degree? And I said, I hadn't thought about it. And he said, well, you need to go to Duke. And I said, Duke. Right. And literally I thought he was kidding, but he knew people who knew people. And I found myself at Duke, and I immediately felt like I was way out of my league. I mean, I looked at all these young people coming in the first day of class, and I said, I don't belong here. And what happened was really interesting. I stood in the corner of the student center at the Divinity School, and I saw somebody come in the door that looked as miserable as I felt.
Oh, my goodness.
And he was about my age, older than the normal incoming Divinity School student. And so we hooked up, and he had military experience, been to Vietnam as well. And so we started talking, and pretty soon another older student came in, and the three of us kind of gravitated together. And what happened was that first semester at Duke, we became a support group. We didn't know that's what it was, but we were all married. We all had at least one child. And in the course of that semester, we became best friends, closer than friends, in a support group, like I said. During the summer, we started all in January. During the summer, of course, we all wanted to pastor churches. Well, according to the Methodist Church, they had no churches available in North Carolina at Duke, around Duke. So I had the choice, and I chose doing beach ministry in Atlantic Beach, North Carolina. That sounds like a real cool gig. But yeah, we did most of our work with runaways and drug culture between 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and had sort of a safe house for folks. There were 3 div school students and my wife and I there. And one of my other friends served a small church in Raleigh, but Ken, the first person I saw, came from Virginia, and his superintendent needed pastors badly. So he already had a church promised to him. So he talked to his superintendent, and the superintendent said, you have friends that might serve churches? And so the process was so far along that we didn't get to visit, but he called, and I learned my first lesson on humility. He asked me who I was and what I wanted and stuff. And so I told him, I'd been a youth minister at a large urban church in North Carolina when I was in college, and I had experience as a chaplain's assistant. I really pumped myself up the way you would to a boss. And he said, well, I haven't been able to get up with your other friend. What kind of experience does he have? And I said, well, he's a really nice guy. I said, he doesn't really have as much experience. I mean, he's really committed. He's got a heart for the Lord, but he just haven't had the experience. And the superintendent, without missing a beat, said, well, that just settles it. you obviously have much more experience. And I was going, yeah, I do. He said, I'll give you the 5 churches and I'll give him the 4 churches.
Oh, good.
And so I learned real quick, you don't need to do that sort of stuff. But I start there because that's really the start of the journey that we're talking about.
Uh-huh.
The 3 of us were appointed to churches in rural North Carolina, rural Virginia, in Southside Virginia. We were right outside of South Hill. And between us, the 3 of us had 13 rural churches.
Oh, wow.
And we were going to school full time, commuting an hour and a half one way.
Gee.
And so basically we learned really quick about supporting one another. But you know what we learned? We learned that each one of us had gifts and graces that matched with the others. Where I was weak, my friend was strong. Where he was weak, our other friend was strong. And rather than compete, we decided we would work as a team. And so with those 13 churches, they were all small. They were all struggling. They were all had that feeling that many small Methodist churches have, that they weren't ministering. They were surviving.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And we decided to change that. And so for the 4 years that we were there, we made sure we worked as a cooperative parish. We weren't ever legally called that, but we had our churches go together. I remember the first thing we did is we gathered clothes for Appalachia. They'd never been able to do anything as 1 or 2 churches, but as 13 churches, we filled a huge U-Haul truck. And the men took it to Appalachia, and it made them feel so empowered to be able to do something.
As you're talking about that, that's a group of churches. The same thing could apply to a group of small charities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the key philosophies that I've always worked with is everything is built on partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
The more partners you can have involved, the stronger the program is.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying it's easier, but it really impacts more people, not only from the relief side, but from the folks doing it. And that's a key principle in what's helped grow the organizations I've been a part of is we always seek partnerships. One example is with Rise Against Hunger. When I started, fess up, I knew nothing about international relief work. I'd been doing domestic relief work for 20 years, and I'd done a few things internationally, but how you work internationally was something I had to learn on the job. But one of the things that I committed to was I was not going to start offices internationally, because internationally, every place I wanted to work, there were relief organizations already on the ground. So I didn't need to reinvent the wheel. I just needed to partner with the folks already there who had a better idea of what was necessary.
I'm going to not let that one slip by.
Okay.
You really understanding the synergy of collaboration. Let's just do more stuff than we can do by ourselves.
Absolutely.
So what year was that when you thought about
I started Rise Against Hunger in 1998, in January of 98.
Mm-hmm.
What had happened was earlier than that, Society of San Andrew had a program called the Potato Project. And that's a story of God's grace. I mean, basically, Society of San Andrew was an intentional community devoted to covenant living. Mm-hmm. And what that means is, in response to world hunger, we said we wanted to come together and demonstrate a lifestyle that the entire world could adopt, a just lifestyle, a fair lifestyle. And so we had 2 families that moved together on a farm. Mm-hmm. We covenanted to live under the poverty level. And at that, when we started in 1979, that was about $2,000 a person.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so if you put all the stuff in the world in a pile and everybody took a fair share,
yes,
in 1979, it would come out to about $2,000 a person. And so we made a covenant that we were going to live on under that. We had 9 people in our community, 4 adults and 5 kids. And so we said, we're going to live on under $18,000 a year. Well, we never made it up to $18,000 a year. But basically, we lived under the poverty level out of choice. And we wanted to do that not only to identify with the poor, but to demonstrate to the church especially that if we wanted to, we could live in a way that the entire world would be able to have a fair share.
So the year you founded this organization was what?
79 is
79. That was that year. Okay. And it was founded as Stop Hunger Now.
No, it was founded. The first organization was founded as Society of St. Andrew.
Society of St. Andrew.
I was the co-director of that from 1979 to 1998. In 1998, and the reason I left Society of St. Andrew is because after 15 years or so, both my co-director and I were getting burned out. Mm-hmm. You start out with your hands working with the poor, shoulder to shoulder. Mm-hmm. But as the organization gets bigger, you get further and further away from the poor. Mm-hmm. We worked with the poor, then we had staff who worked with the poor, then we had managers who worked with it, then we had directors of the managers, and all of a sudden you look around and you've got 70 or 80 employees in 5 or 6 states, and you're so far you can't even see the poor. And so I started using my vacation time to go internationally to work in Africa and what have you, so I could still get my hands dirty.
That's interesting. You get so far away from the work that's your passion. We get sucked into the organization. There's a lesson in that too.
Oh, absolutely.
So when did you found this organization that's now Rise Against Hunger?
1998.
98. And it was founded as Stop Hunger Now.
It was founded as Stop Hunger Now. And the reason the name is important. The reason I founded it because as I did my work internationally, it hit me that although hunger in the United States is real and it's horrible and it's immoral, richest country in the history of the world, that we have hunger doesn't make sense. You know, and the Christian church has to understand its responsibility in that. But as I worked internationally, there were opportunities that started arising to do stuff internationally. Mm-hmm. And my passions fairly quickly turned to doing international work because although hunger is real in the United States, it's qualitatively different than hunger around the world. In the United States, no one dies of hunger. Mm. I challenge you to find the newspaper article that talks about the last time anyone died of hunger. They might have died of exposure, hunger, or something, but it's such a rarity that it's just not measurable. You go international, and now after all these years, we've got hunger down to where it's only about 20,000 people a day.
A day.
But when I started, it was like 30,000 people a day dying of hunger. Now, you know, that's there's no way to explain that. And so I've always wanted to have the biggest impact. Mm-hmm. And so I started focusing internationally, and my partner, you know, after you work together with somebody for 20 years, you know each other. Uh-huh. And he looked at me and said, if you need money for that, you raise it. We don't have money for that. I mean, at that time, Society of St. Andrew was doing about $15 or $20 million worth of in-kind work, and our cash budget was $1 million, $1.5 million a year. And so we never had enough money. And so that's how Stop Hunger got started, because I needed to raise $25,000 for a special project. Didn't have it. And after my partner said, well, if you want it, you raise it, which was the way we worked. I remembered that 5 years earlier, a donor had come to us, he and his wife, and we had an office in a sheep shed, and they came and sat around the table and said they wanted to help feed the hungry. Now, his vision of hunger was the starving child with the bowl held up with a vulture in the background. Mm-hmm. And at that point, my partner and I said, we don't do that. And we didn't. We worked in the United States using tractor trailers to haul produce to food banks and Native American reservations. So we told him we really appreciate the offer, but that's not what we do, and so it's not a good match. But we have a friend who's the chairman of the board of Food for the Hungry, and we'll give you his name and y'all can connect. So we did the cardinal rule, broke it. You never give a donor away. We gave this donor away before we ever started working with him. Strange thing, though, every year he would call us and say, you've got any special projects? And we'd say, yes. He said, well, send me the bill for about $8,000, $10,000. And so he would never give us a grant. He'd never write us a check. But he'd always give us a gift of about $10,000 by paying a certain bill. I remembered his vision. And so after 5 years, I went to our director of development and called him. And I said, give me this guy's name and number. I called him. He said, let's meet. So I went to Virginia Beach and we had lunch. And I'll never forget it. The timing was amazing. I drove from Big Island. He drove a couple of blocks and we got there at the same time. And as we're going in the restaurant, we meet in the parking lot and we're walking in the restaurant. He said, well, how is things going? Just making small talk. And I said, great. My daughter is having her first child. He said, oh, you're going to be a grandfather for the first child. Now the proper answer would be, of course I am. Yes, that's great. But I said, no, actually when my son turned 21, he got a girl pregnant. And so I've got a grandson. And I'm going to myself, shut up. You're talking to, this is not the way you, shut up. It was like I had verbal diarrhea. We get in and the maitre d' seats us. And then he comes back and he starts to speak. And John just waves his hand and says, no. And he leans across the table and he says, Ray, last year was the worst year of my life. I went from being a millionaire to not being a millionaire. I got kicked out of my own organization that I started. My wife divorced me, and my son had to get staggering drunk to tell me that he had gotten a young lady pregnant.
Oh my goodness.
Now this is before the menus get there.
Oh my goodness.
All that is just simply to say,
oh my goodness,
we were on a level that you normally don't get to with a donor until you've cultivated them for years. And that's how Stop Hunger Now got started, to be honest.
Wow. We are, if you're on, we're recording live the Nonprofit Exchange. We're broadcasting live on Facebook. So if you've come by and wonder what this is the Nonprofit Exchange. Every Tuesday at 2 Eastern, we talk with a thought leader about how they have made things happen. So, and we're talking to Ray Buchanan about multiple charities that he has founded. But Ray, I have moved from using the word nonprofit a lot, even though this is the Nonprofit Exchange. In conversation, I use the word charity because we have tax-exempt charity. And it's a business and a framework that's got a lot of rules and regulations for IRS. And my co-host here, Russell, used to work for IRS, and he's very much up to date on how we need to comply with those. But we really still need to have strong business principles. But if you're listening on Facebook, feel free to ask questions. If you're listening to the podcast sometime in history, you can ask questions on the podcast page. And we'd learn from other people's stories. So, Ray, when you're looking back and talking about starting these, Russell was just meeting with a gentleman that's got a hunger project. This is quite an amazing story, Russell, about Ray starting what was called Stop Hunger Now. Now it's called Rise Above Hunger. So you had an idea. How hard was it to get it off the ground? How hard was it to get people to support it with you? And then how hard was it to get some funding?
Well, all of that, I want to say one of the first things that with my first organization, Society of St. Andrew, what made that successful is that when we started our first big project, after 3 years, we fell into the potato project, which is taking unused produce otherwise thrown away, wasted. We were going to get that to the hungry across Virginia. Mm-hmm. And basically, the farmers agreed to give us the produce, but they had to get their money recouped on the extra labor, the bags, and the transportation. And so I could tell you a lot of funny stories about that, but long story short, they could get us potatoes that normally would be thrown away for 3 cents a pound. Phenomenal price. Well, they said they could get us 1 million pounds of potatoes. Well, 1 million pounds of potatoes at 3 cents a pound is $30,000. At that point, our two families were living on between $12,000 and $15,000 a year. Mm-hmm. So that was all the money in the world. Basically, that first $30,000 came from the United Methodist Church seeing the vision and buying into the vision. And I could talk for hours about the faithfulness in that, because at that point we were seen as a couple of hippies, living on a farm, and we weren't the fair-haired young guys, but they had enough faith to put the money into it. But once that project started, we had never realized that we were just scratching the surface. Farmers kept wanting to give us more and more produce, which required more money, and we found more distribution areas, which required more transportation. And literally within 2 months, we had $30,000 to last the summer, and after about a month and a half, we were out of money. It hadn't been misused. It was just the need was so great.
Yeah.
And so we started, having to raise money. And the first thing we did was my partner's brother, who had a business degree, came to us and said, y'all need somebody to run this. And both of us understood that, numbers are not my friends. Okay. I'll be honest with you. Okay. I like letters. You can make words with letters, and words make sentences. Numbers are just numbers. And so we asked his brother to help us, and he graciously came to help us. And from day one, we ran the organization as a business.
From day one.
From day one. And that is one of the biggest benchmarks that I can point to, that why it worked is because we didn't operate as a church. Now that sounds very horrible, but it's true. We operated as a business, not only in that the finances were handled to the penny. I can literally remember Friday evening at 6:00, realizing that David was still in the office. We operated out of a sheep shed, had previously had sheep in it. And I'd see the light on, I'd go out and I'd say, David, what are you doing? He said, I can't get these books to balance. And I said, what is it? He said, it's 27 cents. I cannot find it. And I said, here's a quarter. And he said, no, you don't understand. And I mean, that's the way we operated financially from day one. But we also realized that when we made a promise, it was a commitment. And unlike a lot of charities, church organizations, nonprofit, it was not, we'll get to it if we can, when we can. If we said we were going to do something, we did it. And so the operating as a business is a key principle that every nonprofit ought to operate by.
Hey, Russell, we teach this stuff. Here he is telling us it works. How about that?
Hey, the sweet spot is where funds and compliance and compassion come together. That's what I'll call the sweet spot. Yeah. 27 cents, by the way, is not material if you got more than $5.
Well, I understand that, but the principle is the same,
Yeah, but the principle is the same. And so, it's operating like a business without losing who you are.
Right.
And it's important if you've got a mission that, if the mission is spiritual, you don't have to lose that. There's a point in there where money and spirituality mix. It's just understanding that both are critical components to what you're doing, so that you don't leave either out to the exclusion of they're not mutually exclusive, in other words.
Absolutely. Well, to jump forward, when I started Stop Hunger Now, basically I met with this donor, and I was asking him for $25,000. Now, he had been giving us $10,000 a year for 5 years. And when I got to the point where he said, now, what do you really want? I told him I needed $25,000 to move 3 containers of food to North Korea and a couple of places in Africa. He said, fine, I'll write you a check Monday. Now, anytime you can take a donor from $10,000 to $25,000, that's a home run. And I was just going internally, yes. I couldn't wait to get home and work out the logistics. But he looked across the table and he said, tell me, you said you were burned out and were thinking about leaving the organization a couple of years earlier. What is it that you really want? And not trying to be flip, but I said, I want to feed more hungry people. And he's not the kind of man that accepts an answer like that. He said, I ask you a serious question. Give me a serious answer. And so I had to take a deep breath, and I answered him, what I'd really like to do is to go to crisis areas around the world, find out what the real need is, come home and cut through all the red tape and BS and get that need met as fast as possible. And he leaned across the table and he said, that's exactly my dream, with one exception. And I said, what is that? He said, I'd want you to take the checkbook with you. And we finished the meeting. And as we're getting in our cars, he looked at me, he said, let's see if we can't make our dreams come true. 2 days later, he called and said, how soon can the head of my foundation and I meet with you and your partner in Big Island? And 2 days after that, 4 days after our original meeting, they were in our office. And both my partner and I knew what he wanted, to set up an international hunger relief organization. My partner and our wives and I would been nonstop figuring out how to make it work. Now, at that point, Society of St. Andrew had an 18-year track record. We were known throughout the United Methodist Church. We're working in all 48 contiguous states. We constantly went up to the Hill and gave testimony on hunger and gleaning. And I was on the House Select Committee and a bunch of stuff like that. And so we just said, oh, good, we're going to have a domestic arm, international arm. So we presented that to him as what we were going to do. And he just looked at us and crossed his arm across. He says, nope, I'm not interested. We were crushed. We thought we had this perfect, plan. He said, look, you're a domestic hunger organization. Your board is always going to fight over who gets the money. He said, here's what I'll do. I'll give you $250,000 a year for 2 years. 3 conditions. 1, you set up a new organization. 2, you set up a completely separate board of directors. And 3, you, pointing right at me, be the director.
Oh.
Now, what do you do when you're 50 years old and somebody looks at you and says, I will make your dreams come true?
Oh, my.
Now, that is so exciting. But if you look at the flip side of it, we had an organization that we'd started as 2 families living under the poverty level, was now at the pinnacle of our ministry. Like I said, we're at Capitol Hill every month. Our senator's wife was on our board. It was a horse you could ride till you wanted to get off. It was only going to get bigger and better. You leave that to start over, basically. You leave that to, the 4 adults that founded the Society of St. Andrew prayed together and cried together and discussed for 2 or 3 days. And we came to the conclusion that if we didn't take his offer, that money was not going to be there. And to get to a place where we could do the international ministry that we wanted would take us a couple of years to raise another $250,000 because we had maxed out our fundraising capacity at that point. And we knew that it would take us a year or 2 to ramp up if we could. And so we thought we'd take his offer because we could do more good faster by doing that than any other way we could. And so I left Society of St. Andrew at that point to take over, start a new organization. And that's how Stop Hunger Now got started. I started January 1, 1998 with a guaranteed $2,500. Now, to show you how simple I am, I had 2 goals for 1998 for Stop Hunger Now. I wanted to do at least $500,000 worth of ministry. I wanted to double his gift of $250,000. And secondly, I wanted to be in 5 or 6 countries. I didn't want to be a single country nonprofit. At the end of the first year, we were audited, and the audit showed that we had done $2.9 million worth of aid in 18 countries. And that was the start of Stop Hunger Now. And the name is very significant because Society of St. Andrew, my first organization, was named for the disciple Andrew. We liked him because he was always introducing others to Jesus one at a time. Here's my friend. We liked that kind of evangelism. But more importantly, he was the disciple that knew about the boy with the loaves and fishes.
Right.
When Jesus fed the 5,000. Very significant spiritually. But as we grew, we had focus groups and consultants come in. And the first thing every group said, that's the most horrible name you could have picked. There's no worse name. Society of St. Andrew, is that a Presbyterian program? Is it a Catholic program, an Episcopal program? Is it a golfing group? It says nothing about what you do. And I learned that. And so when I started my own organization, Stop Hunger Now, our mission and our ministry were identical. Nobody ever asked, what do you do?
So what's behind the change from Stop Hunger Now to Rise Above Hunger?
Is Rise Against Hunger. That's all right. We rebranded this year because as we grew, we realized that Sodexo has their foundation is called Stop Hunger. And we dozens of times tried to work with them to get the trademark Stop Hunger Now, and their lawyer said it's too close. And for 12 years or 15 years, we worked side by side, no problems. But as our program expanded internationally and we started doing more programs outside the U.S., we bumped up against Sodexo in England, for example, where they didn't want us to brand Stop Hunger Now in England for some reason. And so our board started looking at it and realized that we had to get a trademark name. And as we started looking at marks, we couldn't even get the mark that we had, so we had to start from scratch to rebrand.
It's really good to have that clarity. Part of your brand tells people what you do, and if there's confusion, people don't want to help you. So Russell, I know your brain's going with this funding thing. Russell teaches charities how to attract funding, and he's one of our Wayfinders in Center Vision. Okay. One of the we're talking about him joining the Wayfinder team, and I didn't tell him about the initiation process.
But I don't have a lot of hair to shave.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's full heads of hair, and then there's perfect ones like this.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
You don't need to dress this up.
I hear you.
So, Russell, did you come from you got the striped shirt on? People on the podcast can't see that. Did you come from a ball game where you're refereeing, or were you on the work camp for the prison?
Rocks and the Little Rocks all morning long.
I hear you.
So, Russell, you're listening to this story like I am, and I'm thinking, well, this is like a fairy tale story. How did these people come along? So, not everybody.
Here's one of the like inmates here.
Look at that. Look at that. So this is one of our colleagues in Denver. So as you're real popular. People just drop by where you're talking.
I'm just a party waiting to happen here.
I know.
Yeah.
So as you're listening to his story, how many charities have we worked with over the years that really struggle to get somebody to believe in them, to help them get some funding? So there must be something that worked with your tenacity, your language or something. So Russell, what are you hearing, and what question do you have for Ray about this early stage and putting the funding piece together and then getting the right team?
Well, I mean, that's a perfect illustration of what we talk about when we talk about why are you doing what it is that you're doing and what do you want to get out of it. That's a perfect illustration of how important that is, because that's exactly what happened to Ray. And when somebody brings that horse to you and says, here's the gift horse, you don't quibble over what color the bow is. You just say thank you and move on. And so there's a lot of fear involved with that. But you took the bull by the horns and went on and did what it was that you thought you needed to do, and focus on the fact that the mission is important. This is big. This is something that's bigger than me. Got to go here. I've got to do this. And here it is. And so face that fear and go ahead and do it anyway. And talk with people and find out what's important to them. And you were able to speak their language. And that's why they partnered with you. And so when you talk to people, it's important to use language that is important to them and that they value, and move from that standpoint. So let's talk about that a little bit, Ray, because I'm sure there were some doubts or some voices come up. We have our critics, we have I call them itty bitty committee, and I throw a little something extra in, but this is PG-13. I'm not going to throw the extra word in there. Yeah, itty bitty committee that comes calling when you go to grasp that dream and then you go to take it a step further. Talk about how you handle some of those conversations that were going on in your head and push through them to reach for the bigger goal.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I tell friends that Stop Hunger Now started in January 1998. We knew about it from the end of August. That's when the donor made the decision to move forward. From the September through March, that 6-month period was probably the period where I was most frightened in my whole life, because I had always worked with a partner, worked as a team ministry. We had gotten very successful with what we were doing. We fulfilled all our commitments and were just growing. And I was getting ready to leap out into an area I knew basically nothing about, with no support network behind me. And I was so frightened, but I realized after I did it, it was, I was thinking it was like jumping across the Grand Canyon, and actually it was just like stepping off a curb. It was just a change. It was nothing great. I think what helped me was what I'd learned with my first organization is people honor results. And the people allowed us to do the potato project because they had seen us living for 3 years according to, a basic lifestyle of justice. That being just and living that out gave us a platform to do the domestic hunger. Doing the domestic hunger piece for 18 years said that, yes, we can fulfill what we promised. So when I started Stop Hunger Now, that first year, we were able to make some huge accomplishments, again, through the grace of God. But for example, my first trip in January of 1998, I went to Nicaragua, Honduras, and Haiti, because that's the 3 poorest countries in the Western Hemisphere. Well, during those trips, I made started partnerships, and started putting the protocols in place to help some organizations. And all of a sudden, in August of that year, we had Hurricane Mitch, one of the biggest hurricanes that hit Central America. Because I'd worked with these folks, I had the protocols in place and was able to get them funds that allowed them to be the first organizations in Honduras, for example, to actually make a difference for the hungry. When people see that you're actually making a difference, they want to be a part of that. People are hungry to help. The biggest difficulty that I've seen is they don't know how. If you can demonstrate that your organization really makes a difference, you will not have difficulty finding funding most of the time.
If you go out there and knock on doors.
If you go out there and knock on doors to start with, it's always the case that when you need money the most, it's the hardest to get. And when you get to the place where you've grown the organization to where money is not quite as difficult to come by, it flows in. And that's always been my understanding, but I will just say, in the early days, like first organization in Society Center, when we started the Potato Project and we started spending money, at first it was $1,000 a month, then it became $1,000 a week. And we literally had the capacity to spend ourselves out of existence in any 2-day period that we decided to move enough produce. Went to DC and talked with a lady at a project where we were getting potatoes for her. And she said, I know a man that might want to help you. He said, let me give you his phone number. And he likes organizations like yours. And, he'll probably give you $1,000. And $1,000 was wonderful for us. So I called the number. It was a business number. And he never had come in by 11 o'clock. And he had always left by 1 o'clock. And literally for over a week, I couldn't get up with him. So I finally asked the secretary or administrative person, I said, I'm sorry, but I really need to talk to this gentleman. Is there any other way I can get a hold of him? She said, well, let me give you his home phone. And so I called his home phone for a week and never got up with him. And we were panicking. The need for money was so great. We were at a loss. And I called the secretary back and she said, oh, I gave you his bedroom number. Let me give you his den number. And so the first time I called, this young man, and he was a young man, answered. And I told him who I was and what we were doing. He said, oh, man, that is so cool. I like that. Could you use $10,000? And I was hoping for 1,000. And I said, yeah. He said, well, let me talk to my dad and we'll put it through the foundation and we'll give you $10,000. And so with just a letter, I sent him a letter request. He gave us 10,000. Then they gave us another 10,000. Then they gave us another 10,000. That was $30,000 over the course of 2 months with never meeting him, just a letter. And I kept trying to meet him, to take him to lunch and get to know him and cultivate him. And he said, man, I don't do the lunch thing. And I said, fine. I said, one time knew I was going to be in D.C. and I said, I'd love to come see you. And he said, well, come up to the house and we'll talk. And I came to the house, and this was a young guy who had been involved in the drug culture, and it had affected him quite a bit. And he had a huge truck, with a mud bog truck, taller than I was. And he came out, and we spent about 4 hours together just getting to know each other. And he fixed us ham sandwiches in the kitchen, and just a really nice young man who was really trying to find himself. I mean, he had a good heart, and never talked about money the whole time. As I was getting ready to leave, he reached into his back pocket and he gave me an envelope. He said, now, we've been giving you money from the foundation. This is from my personal account. He said, I'm sorry it's not any more than it is, but I've been burning through the money a lot faster than I thought. My accountant said that he was surprised that I had any left in the account at all. He said, but this is all I can do, but I believe in what you're doing. Well, I thanked him profusely, of course, and put the money in the car and got in the car and drove out to the edge of the driveway. It's a long driveway outside of D.C. And I couldn't stand it. I wasn't going to get on the road home until I looked at the envelope, and there was a check in the envelope for $43,500 from his personal account. Now, the reason that's significant is that $43,000 got us through the next 3 weeks, at which time the United Methodist Committee on Relief gave us a grant for $100,000. But you just never know how you cultivate donors. But if you're faithful in doing what your passion calls you to do, and you communicate that openly to your donors, they will respond.
That's a big and. A lot of people don't connect those dotted lines, do they, Russ?
Well, yeah, that's that fourth piece of the 4 steps to building a high-performance nonprofit, is communicating that value that you bring. The language is a little different for different people, but it's about relationships. And you get out there and you do it and you communicate that. And that's very important. It's critical. But it's actually being able to go out there, understanding what your core is, and communicating those values. And it may not be for everybody, but you go out there and you do it, and you make those critical connections. And that's what it's all about. It's about relationships. And, and I was just thinking, because that's an example of one donor, but you have different people who volunteer, you have different people who come to work. And one of the, so what are some of the things when people say, why do you work with Rise Above Hunger? What are some of the reasons that people will give? And when you understand that, you can communicate that. So I'm going to put that question to you, Ray, because you've got all of these relationships that you've built, whether it's a staff member, volunteers. What are some of the things that people are saying when the question, why do you work with Rise Above Hunger, comes up?
Well, that's a good question. We get the same answer all the time. We engage about 250,000 to 350,000 volunteers a year now. And we basically engage them through a meal packaging program that allows, it's an intergenerational program that lasts 2 hours, where volunteers package high protein dehydrated meals for school feeding programs internationally. And it's a beautiful entrance into making a difference on hunger. And we get the same responses every time we ask people. We usually don't have to ask them. First of all, they say it's so much fun. We can make a difference. We're having an impact. They can see the connection between their hands and their heart. I mean, it's one thing to write a check, and for some people that's exactly what's needed. But more and more people now in the millennial generation want to be physically involved in what they're committing themselves to, and giving volunteers a chance to be involved makes all the difference in the world. The same thing is true for boards. I mean, I'm passionate about growing boards, because a high-powered, high-impact board really empowers an organization to reach the next level. But it's the same for every level of volunteering. Giving people a chance to make a difference where they can see it and feel it makes all the difference in the world. People come back time and time again to our events because not only are they interacting with other people and having a good time, they know that when they put those meals in the box, the next time that box is open, it's going to be at a school somewhere where the kids would not be able to come to school without those meals. They know they're transforming lives, and that's so important.
That's he's sort of understating the fun part of that. My church in Blacksburg did this, and so in 2 hours, how many pounds of food did we package?
Y'all packaged probably 10,000 meals.
10,000 meals we packaged in 2 hours, and they have an area director that comes in and tells people. It's of course all the resources there, the
Right.
boxes, the gloves. It's a very sanitary process. But it's like an energy field where we're doing stuff, and it's like a church social event. It's like games. I used to lead games for families at church. This is far better. We're doing something worthwhile. But it's really an energized process where people package, and they tell us exactly what's going to happen to it. We put it in these boxes, they take it out, goes into a truck, whoosh, and it's gone. I was very impressed with the organization. It's just like turnkey, boom.
Well, that's part of the secret, the turnkey part of it, and the fun. And the thing is, the more people you have involved in this process, the more fun it becomes. We have done events. One of my favorite events was done in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. We had one university with 4 campuses, and they packed 1 million meals in 7 hours using 4,000 students in 4 locations. And it was just awesome. It was electric. I mean, and we do million meal events all the time. One of the most exciting events I've done recently was February a year ago when Kraft Heinz merged. They brought all their senior leaders from around the world together for their first gathering, and they asked our Rise Against Hunger to come and do a team building event by packaging meals. And so they wanted to package a tractor trailer load of meals, 285,000 meals, and they wanted to do it in 2 hours. So they had roughly 900 to 1,000 employees from around the world. Not employees, leaders. I mean, these are senior leaders. And they came, and this was to merge the Kraft people and the Heinz people together. And they had such a blast. And the CEO of Kraft Heinz was right in there among them, going from table to table, talking about what they were accomplishing. And Kraft Heinz is one of our biggest corporate partners now. I mean, they were then as well. But, I mean, the energy in a room when you can have that many people working on the same thing, interacting with people you normally wouldn't interact with, it's magic.
So what's the website where people can go find out about this?
It's riseagainsthunger.org.
Rise Against Hunger, and it's listed. It'll be listed on the podcast notes. It's listed on the nonprofitexchange.org. It's listed there, and along with your pretty picture. And we'll work the logo. It's a really nice logo. So you started this. The story of that getting started is pretty dramatic. I'll fund if you'll start a new organization. So talk about it today. How many countries, how many pounds of food, how much reach?
Well, we started in 1998, and for the first 7 years, we were a crisis relief organization. I was in the Marines, and so I'm comfortable with being in sketchy situations. And so we focused on getting into areas where the larger organizations either couldn't go or wouldn't go, and we were a fast operation. I mean, we go in faster than most organizations and make stuff happen. I always wanted to move that away from crisis relief into a more sustainable attack on hunger. Our original board the donor who gave me all the money was not interested in that. His idea of feeding the hungry was crisis relief only. And so after about 7 years, we had some board transition and a lot of other stuff. And it was about that time where the tsunami hit, the Christmas tsunami. And I found an organization that was doing the meal packaging. And I came back from visiting with them and said, we're going to do this. And that time I had 3 staff people. And basically I said, we're going to start this in 2 months. And they all laughed at me, but we were able to get it started in 2 months. And the first year we started meal packaging, we packaged 1.1 million meals. The second year it was 3 point. Well, we've grown now to, this year we'll package 75 million meals for the hungry.
75 million from a start of 1.1 million.
Well, yes.
My goodness.
And the point is now we have offices in 20 cities in the United States, and we now have offices in 5 countries. Now, I always said I didn't want to raise a flag in other countries, and we didn't do that until we absolutely had to. And what I mean by that is we don't set up offices in countries to distribute meals. We've got implementing partners that do that, like I said, that do it well. They know what they're doing. But so many countries came to us and said, we want to package meals and engage volunteers in our country. South Africa was the first. And we looked around, and South Africa had all the resources necessary to package meals. And so we started working in South Africa, and then Malaysia, Philippines, Italy. We've got a list of 6 or 7 countries that want us to come in and start offices. But we're very careful about going and starting offices. They have to have all the resources available, and it has to be a workable thing. But for South Africa, for example, they'll package 8 or 9 million meals this year themselves. But what they have done is they have taught the United States so much. And this is the fun part about when you have work as partners. The situation in South Africa is completely different than the United States. They have lots of volunteers, but no funding. The churches in South Africa don't have a financial base. So they had to start going to corporate donors. Where we weren't using corporate donors in the United States so much. And basically, the corporations really got in behind what they were doing and started giving significant amount of funds. And we went to school and said, well, if they're doing it, why don't we work on that? And now our corporate income has grown by over 70% because we went to school with what South Africa was, and we learned from each other that way. In the Philippines, for example, our office there said we use dehydrated vegetables in our meals. Well, rather than buy those on the market, why don't we get farmers to grow them so they can have a sustainable livelihood? So they've got cooperative farms now where the farmers know that when they grow these vegetables, they're going to be bought at a fair price. Now they're actually they're getting the production ready to where these can be dehydrated, which will employ more people. And they've got the whole value chain from growing the vegetables to putting them in the meals and employing lots of. And so in India, they're doing some other. So every country operates as its own entity. And in fact, I just came back from the Philippines a couple of months ago where we had our first strategic global gathering where we're trying to figure out how to operate more as a global organization rather than the U.S. and affiliates. And I can't say enough about the board in the United States willing to look at that and say we can be one among equals rather than, being paternalistic about it. And it's a huge sea change, but it's fun to see that happening. Never envisioned when I stepped out and started Rise Against Hunger. We have probably 120, 140 employees here in the United States and in 5 countries, but it just keeps growing because it's doing what it says it needs to do.
So we're hitting our last 5 minutes and a wrap here. So Russ, do you have some comments or last question for our guest today?
Well, innovate and collaborate. That's the name of the game, and that's what you're doing. You can spread that impact. It's more powerful than the sum of the parts, and
Absolutely.
that's what you're doing there. And it's an ideal model. That's what high performance nonprofits do. So I commend you on that. You're doing a remarkable job. What is the big goal for 2018? What is the takeaway? What is the impact that you want to bring in 2018?
We'll probably, we're really in our strategic planning process now. We've just gone from 1 year budgeting to 3 year budgeting. In 18, we're going to be going to probably 100 million meals, but that's just a part of all that's going on. Our global model will be begin to be implemented in 18, and hopefully by 2020 that'll be operational, fully operational. It's more collaboration in 18 than we've had even in 16 or 17.
Wow. So I'm going to talk about our sponsor here for a minute, and I want you to be thinking about a parting word that you have for people who want to do something but are afraid to do it and think it's an uphill battle or it's impossible. You know, you've given them a great story, but what advice do you have? Our sponsor for the Nonprofit Exchange podcast is the United Methodist Board of Higher Education and Ministry. umcyberlearning.com. No, it's Cyber Campus, UMC Cyber, CYBER Campus.com. You don't have to go to college. You can study online. It's online Christian learning at a very high level, very practical. If you want to be better at running an organization, work on yourself more than you work on the organization. The organization can only go as far as our ability to lead them. Center Vision has programs in there for leaders. Methodist clergy and others can get continuing education credit with our programs and others. So UMC, like United Methodist Church, cybercampus.com. The link will be in the podcast and on the notes. They're our sponsor and help us carry these messages for free to people. Ray Buchanan, this has been an inspirational hour. We've you said, how long is it going to be? I said, as long as it takes. Well, we could talk all day. But as we're wrapping this interview up, what word of encouragement or what thought do you have for people who have a great idea like that, but they're afraid to get started or they don't know where to start?
Well, let the preacher come out of me for a minute. 3 points.
Mm-hmm.
First, I think, is faithfulness. You got to be faithful to what you know is right and what you know you're called to do. And that means doing it. The second is vision. When you're faithful to that vision, people will see that and respond to it. And the third is get off your butts, BUTS, and act on that vision. You know, faithfulness, vision, and action. Those three things are what allows you to do far more than you ever imagined you could do. And it's what encourages people to get in and work with you. Those three things, you do that and you can make a difference in the world. And I think that's what we're all trying to do, is change the world forever. That's what I tell people, you know, Rise Against Hunger. The vision is, you know, to create a world without hunger. Very simple. But what we're really trying to do is change the world forever. Mm-hmm. And I want to be a part of that.
A little bit at a time, one person at a time. You've compounded that over the years. Ray Buchanan, thank you for spending time with us and sharing your story. Russ, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Russ.
Many thanks.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.